Little town called Minersville in the U.S., and the police department there received a letter with $5 in the envelope and a little note. And the return address was Feeling Guilty, Wayward Road, Anytown. The police chief, his name was Michael Combs, he told the local newspaper, he said there was a note there, and he read the note. He says, "Dear Police Department, I've been carrying this ticket around for 40 plus years, always intending to pay. Forgive me if I don't give you my info. With respect, Dave." Feeling guilty. The fine was for a 1974 parking ticket. It was $2, and he included an extra $3 for interest, I guess. But I don't even know if they make American $2 bills anymore. But I could put 2 ones there. But he gave $5. You know, how many of us have ever had a time where you felt guilty about something? Maybe driving down the road, and you look in your rearview mirror, and there's lights that are flashing. And there's a police officer back there that would like to discuss with you the speed that you've just been traveling at. You ever had that happen? Not a soul here with a speed. Oh, Brother Wayne, finally got one honest person here. And that feeling, that knot, that kind of, oh man, look down. I remember the last time I was pulled over for speeding was on a youth outing, and I wasn't paying attention. I'd taken a bunch of kids horseback riding, and we were driving down the road there, and they'd changed the speed limit from 80 to 60. And I was speeding in the 80, I was about 90 in the 60, and then I looked up, oh man, the police pulled me over, and he saw how handsome I was, and he let me go. Well, that wasn't the reason he let me go, but he did let me go. I was really thankful for that. But you know, sometimes we realize we've been caught, and we feel guilty. Maybe we have said something to someone, and it was not a nice thing that we said, and we walk away and we think, man, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have said that. And that knot gets in your stomach because you feel like you're guilty. And you are. You know, we have seen as we've looked through the first 2.5 chapters of the book of Romans, how Paul has been describing how we don't measure up to God's righteousness. And in fact, we are all guilty. And it starts off there with a section kind of talks about everybody, and then he's kind of specific on the Gentiles and the vile sins of their day that the Gentiles were practicing. And it's all happening all over again now, but what they were doing and how they were condemned, and showed that how guilty they were. And then he switched over in chapter 2 and approached his fellow countrymen, his fellow Jews. Paul was a Jew, all right? Not only, just a little tip here for you, not only was Paul a Jew, Paul was a Pharisee at one time. He studied his scriptures very diligently as a child, and he grew up to be a Pharisee. It tells us that in the book of Philippians. It also tells us that in the book of Acts, where he says, I'm a Pharisee. When he got hauled into a court session as such, where they were going to do something, he noticed that there was Pharisees on one side and there was Sadducees on the other side, and he says, I'm a Pharisee, and called into question on the resurrection, and so forth, and he used that to kind of get out of a pickle there. But my point is that Paul, as he approached the Jews here in specifically in Romans chapter 2, verses 17 and down through to chapter 3 and verse 8, he's talking with the Jews, is that, you know what? We can look at the Gentiles and all the evil, vile things that they did, but we're no better. The Jews, they put a lot of stock into the law, and they thought that they were immune to God's punishment because they were God's chosen people. So they get a free pass, regardless of whether they're sinning. And we showed you last week where some of them even thought, well, it's a good thing that we do sin. That way we can show how righteous God is. How foolish sin can be, and how foolish it can blind people in thinking, well, actually my sin is a good thing. All right, but we see here, I want to show you something here as we move in. I'm going to skip those verses there that I had there, but Paul comes down to this point here that we're going to look. I want you to take your Bibles and come with me to Romans chapter 3. And we're going to look down starting in verse 9 and moving on down through this chapter. What Paul's going to do is he's going to sum up this whole vast gap that there is between God's righteousness and all of what mankind can drum up as their righteousness, and show what the vast expanse between the two is. The absence of our righteousness, regardless of race, regardless of sex, regardless of our color, our language, our intelligence, our status in the community. It doesn't matter. None of that matters when it comes to righteousness before God. God has no respecter of persons. He doesn't care one way or the other. But for him, it says that there's no male nor female. We're all in one in Christ if we know Christ as our Savior. And there's might be difference in roles, but there's no difference in importance, all right, and in value before God. He goes here, and as we're going to look at this thing, he's going to prove with some Old Testament quotes, which Paul would have done a lot of studying on as he was a child. And we'll see how the quotes that he brings from the Old Testament just lines up. These next 10 verses or so are riddled with quotes from the Old Testament, many of them from Psalms. All right, and there's a couple from Isaiah as well, but it's all just rehashing stuff that God's already revealed. And as Paul does this again, as God inspired Paul to write this letter, these words here are inspired. He uses those words from the Old Testament to show again how far we fall short of God's glory. All right, and so let's take a look in Romans chapter 3, and we're going to start with verse number 9 and verse number 10. It says, "What then? Are we better than they? No, in no wise, for we have before proved both the Jews and the Gentiles that they are all under sin. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one." None righteous at all. I want you to take your Bibles, keep your finger in Romans 3 there, because we're going to come back there. But come with me to Psalm chapter 14. Psalm chapter 14. Going to look at a lot of verses from the Old Testament tonight. Some I'm going to post on the screen, and others I'm going to have you look to. But in Psalm chapter 14, it says, "The fool hath said in his heart," verse 1, "there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good." Do you recognize that from our Romans passage there? "The Lord looked down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there were any that did understand and seek God. They are all gone aside. They are altogether become filthy. There is none that doeth good, no, not one." Exactly the same as as he is said in there in verse 10. There is none righteous, no, not one. It starts with those that would say that because there's none that are righteous. It says there that the fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. And men in their righteousness and in their faulty righteousness, but in their intelligence, they think that there is no God. They start from a position of there can't be a God and then try to explain everything around that. And God says, you're a fool. You're starting from the wrong point there, all right? It parallels, as we see these verses here, over to Romans chapter 1 and verse number 20 and 21. It says, "For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse, because that they knew God and they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened." They were fools because, in essence, they say, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. God calls them a fool. Back in Romans chapter 3, let's look at verse number 11. It says, "There is none that understandeth, there is none that seeketh after God. They are all gone out of the way, they are together become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good, no, not one." Again, repeating that. But I want you to see something here. The man's inner being has been destroyed as such by sin. All right, we're going to see how his inner being, how his outer being, how everything, what sin does. It twists things. It changes things. The damage that sin does to a person runs deep. We think it's nothing. We just pass it off. It's just a thought. It's just a whatever it is, just a tiny little action, and it's not a big deal, but it goes very deep. First off, let's take a look here, and it goes to the mind, all right? Verse 11, there is none that understandeth, okay? The understanding is gone. Man has come a long way in their intellect, in their technology that they can do. And yet, with all of that genius of many people, there are some brilliant people on this planet. They can figure stuff out, and all of these different things for medications, be able to fly somebody into space and bring them back down, whatever, these things. But despite how brilliant we have become with all these universities and colleges and libraries and everything around, man is foolish when it comes to spiritual things. Left to themselves, left to people just by themselves, they discard what is the most important thing, and that is God. Even nature itself, as I read there in chapter 1, in verse 20 and 21 there, it talks that even nature just says this is God, but they turn their back on him. But the sin warps mankind, and it warps their minds. Their very intelligence is gone. There is none that understandeth. You know what else sin does here? It says, there's none that understandeth, there's none that seeketh after God. Not only does it warp your mind, sin, it also warps the hearts of men so that they don't do what they're designed to do. We are designed to worship God. That's what we're for. That's why God created us, to worship him. And yet, when sin gets in there, that sin destroys not only our minds, but sin destroys our hearts. There is none that seeketh after our God. They are all gone out of the way. They are altogether become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. It also, this sin runs deep. It takes out your mind. It takes out the heart. And it takes out the will to do. It corrupts. Sin corrupts. The very actions that we do are corrupted. We see that, it went from, it's not the second sin, there was other sins there, but the first two sins that are in our Bibles. The first sin is mentioned, that is Adam and Eve, obviously, choosing someone other than God, just as choice. What's the second sin recorded? Murder. The second one is murder, where Cain kills Abel. And there's other sins before that. They certainly didn't get to be that point. Like Cain and Abel didn't grow up to be men and not have sinned in between there. They had many times, as we do. But as God records in his word, it didn't take long. We're talking one generation in, it goes from rejecting God to murder. One generation in. It doesn't take long for sin to take its course. Mind, heart, and will. And then he goes on, and it's from head to foot. Verse 13, their throat is an open sepulcher, an open grave. Looks nice on the outside, but if the grave is open, what's coming out of that grave? A stench, because what's in there is rotten. Their mouth is an open sepulcher. It's like a grave that's open, and there's just what's bodies in there. Their throat is an open sepulcher. With their tongues they have used deceit. The poison of asps is under their lips. I'm going to put a verse up on the screen here for us, Psalm chapter 5 and verse 9. It says, for there is no faithfulness in their mouth. Their inward part is very wickedness. Their throat is an open sepulcher. They flatter with their tongue. Paul wasn't making something new up. God had taught him this before. God had taught David this before in Psalms. And from the mouth, all right, we see it as we go down to the last half of this verse, it says that their tongues they have opened deceit. The poison of asps is under their lips. In Psalm chapter 140 and verse 3, it says, they have sharpened their tongues like a serpent. Adder's poison is under their lips. I read a little thing on poisonous snakes. And they have their fangs. Their fangs aren't out all the time. Their fangs are folded back. And then when they arch up and they're going to bite, the fangs flip out and they're hollow. These teeth, and when they bite down inside of their lip, above that tooth, there is a sac of poison, and as they bite down, it squeezes on that sac of poison, and then the poison runs down the tooth and into whoever the lucky person is that's on the other end of that tooth. We saw Paul, just comes to mind. Remember when they were shipwrecked, and Paul was throwing sticks in the fire, and that poisonous snake jumped out, and it latched onto his hand, and he shook the thing into the fire and just kept on going. And everybody says, ha, well, if the sea didn't get him, the snake got him because he's an evil guy. And they watched him. Paul just kept on doing what he was doing. And, oh, boy, there must be something special about this Paul. All right. And there was something special about that Paul. All right. And God protected him from that. But here we see that it's talking about your throat, the very words that people say, that it's just a poison. Because that's what sin does. It takes out, sin warps the mind, warps the heart, warps the will. It warps the things that come out. It corrupts the things that come out of the mouth. As we get to verse number 14, it says, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Psalm chapter 10 and verse 7, his mouth is full of cursing and deceit and fraud. Under his tongue is mischief and vanity. The things that come out of our mouths, Jesus put it in a very neat little package. When he was on earth, he said this, I didn't put this verse, but in Matthew chapter 12, verse 34, it says, O generation of vipers. Interesting that he called them vipers. We just finished talking about that. But how can ye, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. Out of the abundance of the heart. When someone gets mad, they say things, and they might say, well, I didn't really mean that. But you know what? That's probably what you really did mean. You just really didn't want to say that. But that's where your heart's at. Because sin, that's what it does. Takes out the mind, takes out the heart, takes out the will. Takes out the will to do what you want to do. Sin stops with that passage there. It says that thing that I would do, I don't do, and then I'm not quoting it properly because I didn't look it up. It just came to mind now. And the things that I would do, I don't do. You remember that passage where Paul's saying there? It's because it's what sin does. It takes the will and like addicts and so forth. That sin of allowing something else to control them, whatever that is, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, whether it's sexual things, whatever that is, and they allow that to come in there and they're addicted to that thing. That thing owns them because they've given a foothold to that. Same thing can happen with Christians, folks. If we give Satan a foothold with that sin is a binding. Sin isn't a freedom. People say, well, Christians, you can't do this and you can't do that. It's like we're chained up. We're not chained up. We're free from that stuff. I don't want to be addicted to something. All right? That's a bondage. That's a chaining down. But that's what sin is. Takes care of your will, takes care of your heart, takes things out of your mind. It takes things out of your mouth that come out. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, as Christ says. We come down to verse 15 here. We're talking about the head, the mouth. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their ways, and the way of peace they have not known. In Isaiah chapter 59 and verse 7, it says, their feet run to evil. They make haste to shed innocent blood. Their thoughts are thoughts of iniquity. So here's head to toe right here, talking about your feet going to mischief, and your thoughts, again, we're talking about that. Wasting and destruction are in their paths. We see the way of peace they know not, as it tells us there, destruction and misery in their ways, and the way of peace they have not known in Romans chapter 3, verse number 17. The way of peace they know not, and there is no judgment in their goings, and they have made them crooked paths. Whosoever goeth therein shall not know peace. not have that peace. Their feet are taking them where there is no peace. Brother Sean just preached on Wednesday night about putting on the shoes and the things, that having the gospel of peace. All right? And it's so vitally important. And we see here that this sin pollutes your mind, your heart, your will, and your body from head to toe. In Romans chapter 3, looking down verse number 18, it says, there is no fear of God before their eyes. Their eyes, their mouth, their feet, their mind, heart, their will, from head to foot, inside and out. You know what God says? We're guilty. We're guilty. I want you to come with me to Psalm chapter 36. This is a powerful, powerful psalm. Psalm chapter 36. The first 4 verses go right along with what we've just read here in verses 15, 16, 17, and 18. And then it makes a dramatic change, which I think is beautiful. But let's look at the first 4 verses of chapter 36. It says, a transgression of the wicked saith within my heart that there is no fear of God before his eyes. No fear of God. For he flattereth himself in his own eyes, until his iniquity be found hateful. The words of his mouth are iniquity and deceit. He hath left off to be wise and to do good. He deviseth mischief upon his bed. He setteth himself in a way that is not good. He abhorreth not evil. That's an interesting way to put it, those last 4 words. He abhorreth not evil. We need to hate what's evil. Not just do what's good. We need to hate what is evil. I'm not talking about hating evil people. That's not what I'm talking. I'm talking about the deeds, the sin. We need to hate the sin. If we truly, really hated the sin, we wouldn't take part in it, would we? So why do we sin? Because we don't hate the sin. And it's talking about this man, particular fellow that the psalmist is talking about here, is David, is the psalmist of Psalm 36, but he's talking about not hating the evil. And David knew what it was like to fall. He knew what it was like to fall, to fail. But we see here that it changes direction. As it talks about the depravity of man, the guiltiness of man, how far we as a human race fall short of God's righteousness, the very best we can do. We fall so far short of that. He changes over to God. Verse 5, thy mercy, O Lord, is in the heavens, and thy faithfulness reaches unto the clouds. Thy righteousness is like the great mountains. Thy judgments are a great deep. O Lord, thou preservest man and beast. How excellent is thy loving kindness, O God. Therefore the children of men put their trust under the shadow of thy wings. They shall be abundantly satisfied with the fatness of thy house, and thou shalt make them drink of the river of thy pleasures. For with thee is the fountain of life. In thy light shall we see light. O continue thy loving kindness unto them that know thee, and thy righteousness to the upright in heart. Let not the foot of pride come against me, and let not the hand of the wicked remove me. There are the workers of iniquity fallen down. They are cast down and shall not be able to rise. Note the difference between wanting to sin and falling and letting sin own, and then letting God be God. It's just as far as east is from the west. As far as you can imagine how powerful, how wonderful God's goodness is. Their ignorance, the ignorance here, look back in Romans chapter 3 there. Trust you kept your finger in there. It says, the way of peace have they not known, verse 17. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Their ignorance of why they have not peace is because of the pride of verse number 18. There is no fear of God. That's why they have no peace. Proverbs chapter 1 verse 7 is the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. That's what's primary. We need to have that fear of God, that trust of God, that respect for God, that love for God, that we want to be in his presence and to be pure before him. That's where the beginning of knowledge is. But fools despise wisdom and instruction. They don't want that because the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Paul's not teaching anything new here. This is all God's word from centuries before, all packed into a nice, neat little package of 10 or 11 verses to put this together. But to show us God's total righteousness versus man's total lack of and inability to conjure up any kind of righteousness of our own. 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 14 says, "But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned." Comes from God. This book, you cannot understand it outside of God. You need God. God will show an unsaved person. I've heard of many people. I think I used this illustration a while back. There was a man that he was giving out little New Testaments to people. And there's this guy, kind of a Skid Row kind of a guy, and he's trying to give him this New Testament. And the man said, "You know, I'm going to take that and I'm just going to use those papers to smoke with. I'm going to make my cigarettes out of those pages." And the missionary said to him, he says, "That's okay." He says, "You can do that if you want, but just promise me this. So you'll read the page before you use it and smoke a cigarette." Yeah, okay. And the guy was just kind of being belligerent with him, and he took the thing there. And it was years later, like 20 years later, this missionary, this fella came when he was speaking somewhere, and this fella came up to me and he says, "You probably don't remember me." He says, "But you gave me a New Testament and you made me promise to read each page." He says, "When I got to John 3:16, that was it. I didn't smoke the Bible anymore after John 3:16. But the Word is truth." We can give our opinions, and that's a nice thing to do. We tell people, you know, God is real, but you know what really works? This book, because it's got the power. This is the power, not our words, not what we can conjure up, but what's in this book. That's where the power is. "The natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolish unto him. Neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned." In Colossians chapter 1 and verse 21, it says, "And you that were sometimes alienated and enemies in your mind by wicked works, yet now hath he reconciled." He could take that person that they will turn to him, and he can change them. Just like that guy who was being belligerent with that missionary, and that missionary he didn't jump up on his high horse and say anything, you know, he just says, "All right, but read it." And that word could change him. That word, God can change us. He is the only one that can change us. We are wicked and vile. That's just our nature, all right? And we say, well, this guy's kind of a nice guy. He might be a nice guy, but you know what? And we put him up against God's scale of what righteousness is. The very best person you can imagine falls very, 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 very short. Could throw a couple more in there, you know, just to make the message longer for you, but he's very, very short of what God's grace is. The evidence here and the verdict is clear. All men are guilty. All mankind is guilty. The Jews were condemned, as we saw in Romans chapter 2 and verse 23. They're condemned because of the law. "Thou that makest thy boast of the law, through breaking the law, dishonorest thou God." The Jews made their thing about the law. And God showed them by the law, no one can keep the law. They couldn't. And he could show them by what their very own standard was. You don't cut it. And the Gentiles, it tells us in Romans chapter 1 and verse 20, and I think I already read that verse, but it's the Gentiles, by God's creation, they are found guilty. By what is clear there, for the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. You look up and you see that sunset. It was neat this morning in our little fellowship time downstairs, and Brother Sean was just asking some people what they, you know, what is something that you've seen or read or heard that just makes you think that God is awesome? Something like, I don't know if I worded him quite right, but I'm close. Am I close enough, Sean? Okay. And the number of people that mentioned things that God had created. We had Niagara Falls. We had sunsets. We had other stuff where people could just see God's creation, and they would let that tell them about who God is. And that verse, it just blows me away, that verse, verse 20 there in chapter 1, where it's, man is without excuse. Just look around. Open your eyes. I was talking with someone a little while ago. I can't remember who it was. It was someone from here. Maybe it was Martha. I can't remember. But the fine things, your temperature's got to be 98.6 degrees. If it's like 2 or 3 degrees colder than that, you are very, very sick. 2 or 3 degrees warmer than that, you are very, very, very sick. Get it up to 5 or 6 degrees more, you're dead. Or the other way. Just those fine things. And Brother Walter he's not here tonight, but he was mentioning about the pH level of the ocean and all these things that God has held together in order for life to even be sustainable. Even the temperature on our planet and everything like that, how he's maintained that so that we could have life. All around us says God. And yet, as I showed here, the Gentiles, those non-Jews basically, all right, and the creation was showing that they fell short of who God was. We see here in verse we haven't read verse 19. Let's read verse 19. Now we know that what things soever the law saith, it saith to them who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. God had the law to show that no one could keep the law. And he's speaking kind of to the Jews here. But we see here in this next verse, verse 20, just this first word, therefore. Therefore. It means because. Simply because. Therefore, by the deeds of the law, there shall no flesh be justified in his sight. For by the law is the knowledge of sin. God gave that law to show, you know what, you can't. Even if I just tell you some of these things that you needed to do, people can't do them because of our nature. Because what has sin done in corrupting our mind, heart, our will, our eyes, our mouth, our feet, what we do. All of those things are corrupted by sin. And before God, we need to realize that we fall short. And Paul did that all the way from chapter 1, showing that God's righteousness and then man's unrighteousness, from chapter 1 right through to chapter 3 and verse 20 here. We see that's what it's there. The law is just a proof that nobody could keep it. Ultimately, the truth is simply this, that no one can meet God's standard of righteousness. Therefore, the only way to be made righteous has to be through God. If man is to be saved, God must save him. That's it. God has to save him. The lengths that Paul went through to show that no one can do enough good to outweigh their sin is conclusive. I'm going to read just 4 verses, I guess, to you. And I just want you to count in here. All right? As I read these 4 verses, I want you to count the words none, which is an absolute word, and all, which is another absolute word on the other end. Just these first four verses. What then, are we better than they? No, in no wise, for we have before proved both the Jews and the Gentiles that they are all under sin. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none that understandeth. There is none that seeketh after God. They are all gone out of the way. They are together become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. Ultimate words, all. All right? All and none. That we stand before God there. All right? Paul spends the rest of the book, from verse 21 and on down, explaining basically what Psalm 36, verses 5 down to verse 10 say about who God is and God's provision for salvation. Need to understand one thing. One thing for all of us in this room. Need to understand that we have no righteousness before God. Any righteousness that we have is imputed righteousness from God to us. But also this. I don't know that everyone in this room has heard the plan of salvation many, many times. Maybe everyone in this room is saved. I don't know. But when you go to tell someone else about salvation, you have to start here, where Paul has started, from Romans chapter 1, verse 1 to chapter 3, verse 20. And they have to admit that they are a sinner. If you cannot get someone, when you're telling them that they need to get saved so that they can get to heaven, and all their mind is on is just in heaven, and they just want to say a little prayer, and they don't come to a point where they realize, I'm a sinner, you're wasting your time. Until you can get a person to understand that before God, we are guilty. We are guilty of sin. We fall short of Romans chapter 3, verse 23 says. We'll get to that in just a couple of verses here next week. But for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And it's not just this little sin here, okay? Okay, I told a little white lie. No. It's gone against God. Adam and Eve, all they did was eat a fruit. Just one bite. What's the big deal? They turned against God. The one thing God said you can't do. Eve got it through secondhand. God told Adam. Adam told Eve. Eve didn't just as well. You know what? It looks good. I'm not supposed to eat it. I'm not supposed to touch it either. Well, God didn't say that. They just kind of added that on there. But all they did was just eat a piece of fruit. And all mankind has been doomed since. Because it was against God. We have God's righteousness over here, and we have anything else way over here. And until we can convince somebody, I hate to use the word convince, it's not up to us. It's up to God has to work on their heart. But when you're talking to them, don't take them somewhere and give them a false hope of something when they haven't even admitted that I'm a sinner. Okay, I'll just say this little prayer and then I'm going to heaven. Wait a minute. Understand what you're doing here. I was so grateful when Casey and Karina, can I use that as an example? It's too late, I'm going to do it anyway, but thank you. When they started coming to church last January, I think, Casey came maybe 4 or 5 weeks before Karina. Neither one of them wanted to just hear some words to say. They came for like 3 months before they understood that they're sinners. Understood what they needed. They understood they needed God. It wasn't just a quick little thing. You got to understand that you're a sinner before you can get saved. So when you're taking someone through, they've got, as Paul spent almost 3 full chapters here just saying, you know what? This is God's righteousness. This is where we are. We need to understand that. We need to let them understand that, you know what? Before God, this here too, verse 9. What then? Are we better than they? No, in no wise. Not that we're better than those people, those sinners. We're in the same boat that they are. You know the difference between me and a drug addict out under the bridge somewhere? I trusted God. He didn't. There's the whole difference. Why am I going to heaven? Because I obeyed God and asked Him to forgive me of my sin, which is just as bad as the drug addict underneath the bridge. And he has not made that choice yet. Hopefully he does. But the point is this, we're not any better. Just like verse 9 says, we're no better. But we need to emphasize when you're talking to somebody, they need to see the vast difference between best I can do and our precious, matchless, wonderful, holy, magnificent, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, immutable God, who created us to worship Him. And He wants us to have that fellowship with Him again. He wants every person. God is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to Him. Let's pray. Precious Father, thank You